Hi, good afternoon in America and good evening in Israel. I'm Shalamis Hess. Welcome to the YU Library's final book talk for the season. Our featured speaker, Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz, is Senior Rabbi of Kehilat Jeshurun in Manhattan, fondly known as KJ. He has written a profound and poignant book, Despite Everything, Chronicle of Jewish Resilience in the Aftermath of October 7th. I think it is most appropriate that we're holding this event following our commemoration of Yom HaZikaron and our celebration of Yom HaAtzmaut. Thank you, Rabbi Steinmetz, for taking the time from your very busy schedule to do this talk, sorry.
Thank you.
I also thank KJ's executive assistant, Dina Farhi, as well as Director of Communications, Esther Fierman. Rabbi Steinmetz has been a congregational rabbi for over 30 years and holds leadership positions in many community organizations. He writes a weekly column for the Jewish Journal and has also written for many other publications, including the Washington Post, the Daily News, the Globe and Mail, La Presse, Haaretz, and the Jerusalem Post. This comment on his weekly essays after October 7th says it all. Quote, during our darkest moments, when we were dizzy, numb, enraged, shocked, and most of all, grieving beyond words, Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz found the words week after week in the pages of the Jewish Journal to nourish our souls and guide us through the fog. When we needed him most, he was there to bring us hope and strength through the light of Torah and the miraculous journey of our ancestors, unquote. Rabbi Steinmetz drew from these and other essays to write his book. We will begin our program with a brief video, after which Rabbi Steinmetz will speak. Feel free to enter your questions in the chat during the presentation.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I guess I'm meant to get started right now. First of all, again, thank you to Shlomis Hess and the Yeshiva University Library for doing this book talk. I think that that was actually a very powerful introduction, and we're going to get to talk about that. I also wanted to just say hello. I see quite a few old friends here, some who are living in Israel, some new friends who are living in New York. And so it's just wonderful to be here with all of you. Um, the book that I wrote, which is entitled Despite Everything, was actually not written as a book. It started out being written as a weekly email. I do a weekly email on the Parsha, and as October 7th came about and that attack occurred, so the weekly email changed. I used to do a weekly email that was really just a straight up Dvar Torah, and now for a year, actually for about a year and a half since, it's really changed dramatically. So I want to talk a little bit about the context for all of these articles that ended up in this book, to sort of just give you a sense of where I was coming from. So I'm going to start from the beginning. It was, Shabbos and America were Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres is, of course, a very significant day. There's meant to be a serious drasha. Uh, you know, I'm in my house. It's about 8:15 in the morning. I'm getting ready for shul. Shul here starts at 9 o'clock. There's a knock on my door, and it's one of my members who lives in my building. This member, not all of our members are Shomrei Shabbat, and this member knocks on my door and says, "Rabbi, you need to know there was an attack in Israel." And I said to the member, I said, "Ranan, okay, I understand." And he said, no, Rabbi, you need to know it was a terrible attack. And I was like, okay, in my mind, unfortunately, the problem with the modern state of Israel is you sort of become inured to the possibility of terror. And in my mind, a horrible attack means that 15 people died. And he says, Rabbi, then he says to me, he says, Rabbi, this is unlike anything you've ever can remember. And at that moment, I realized that everything had changed. Everything had changed for the Jewish people. And I remembered as a child how people would have their televisions or their radios on during the Sukkot of the Yom Kippur War, and I didn't sit and go through any halachic process. I had to know the news in Israel, and I went downstairs, and this is Manhattan, so I got one of the doormen to come up, and he turned on my television to CNN, and I just, until I went to shul, I watched the news, and I came to shul, and I was in the position of trying to tell people what happened. And what's fascinating is that everyone was in denial. It was like, no, Rabbi, no. Like, is it true? Is it true? And my entire life, as the life of all of Klal Yisrael, was turned upside down. So the book is really in many ways a reflection of what happened. And as I articulated it, a few days later, we had a very large fundraiser for AIPAC. And, as I put it to everyone, I said, I need you to understand that on October 7th, when I went to sleep, and October 8th, when I went to sleep, the thing that was going through my mind is what happens if Israel disappears, because that was still, no one knew what was happening, except that we realized that if Hamas continues to attack with its rockets, and Hezbollah attacks with its rockets, and Iran attacks with its rockets, and the West Bank all of a sudden explodes, there was a real possibility on October 7th, October 8th, that Israel might not make it. And it was something that was really, I was thinking to myself, what would I do if Israel didn't make it. And so that is the context out of which this book was born. And what happens in the course of the year and a half, and I'm not such a pessimist, and even in the first article that you'll see here, which is about Shehachianu, what holds my heart together is, if you want to be alliterative, it's about heritage, history, and heroes. Heritage being the Tanakh, the Torah, the Gemara, the lessons that we receive from all of those places. And history is really just the way Jews in the past have dealt with similar situations. And then finally, heroes, stories of different heroes from this war. One of the stories that I told immediately, the day after Simchat Torah here, so Ramaz, the high school, had a major assembly. And one of the stories that I had seen actually on American TV, which is a very well-known story, the story of the T-Bones, Amir T-Bone, who was in one of the kibbutzim in Otif Aza, and his father Noam. And his father Noam was a 70-year-old retired general, and Amir texted him and said, "We're under attack." And Noam said, "I'm coming." And Amir is with his wife in this small shelter in their house, and they're waiting for Noam to come. And Noam finally makes it after a whole story of his own, making it down from Tel Aviv. And Noam comes and knocks on the window, and the kids who have been like sitting in this room for 9 hours straight jump up and say, "Saba higia," grandfather got here. And I remember telling the students at Ramaz, I said, this is now our turn. I'm sorry, it's emotional. It's like so interesting. I'm finally going back to those days. I said to the students at Ramaz that we now have to be Noam T-Bone. They're waiting for us to get there. And this, in many ways, also reflects the American Jewish experience, in that we're not in Israel. We're in Chutz La'aretz. We haven't made Aliyah. Not a time for that conversation right now. But we do have these intense obligations and these very strong ties. And that was our job. And I can say that I am incredibly proud of the effort that my community made and continues to make since the war broke out. I mean, everyone. A friend of mine in Israel described what was going on in Israel as a balagan of chesed. So I have to tell you right here, in our synagogue, it was a balagan of chesed. We had a brand new committee emerged, which was the Israel Emergency Committee, where there were actually all women, a group of women who every single day they were doing remarkable things. And so this book, so let me go into this idea of heritage, history, and heroes as being the three big themes of this book. So let's just give a couple of examples about heritage. I mean, when you read through the Torah readings, there are things that jump out at you every single week as offering you insight into what was happening right then at that moment. When you look at how Lemech boasts that he killed a person, and if you look at the way that Ibn Ezra and Shadal and others, they read this as a boast, meaning Lemech saying, Cain killed one man, and I'm 77 times Cain. I'm a murderer who's much larger than Cain. And the Mefarshim say that Lemech actually, although Rashi has a very different perspective, Lemech is actually boasting about violence. And that, I think, is something that was such a powerful perspective, to think that there can be human beings. We forget there are human beings who can choose to be the worst possible. We forget that there is this idea of bechira, right? And the big mistake that we make is we refer to the Hamas terrorists as animals. They are not animals. They are human beings like us. And that actually makes it worse. They have made this choice, just like human beings can choose to reach a level above angels. Human beings can choose to reach a level below monsters. And so these are the sort of things that each and every week, I'll give you another example. And this is a thought that came to me after 9/11. There's the famous passage at the end of Parshat Toldot that the Ramban even says, I don't know why this is here, where there's a discussion about how Yitzchak redigs the wells that his father dug and gives them the same names. And the Ramban says, I don't know why this has to be in the Torah. But Don Isaac of Bravanel says, no, this is actually meant to teach us about the importance of determination, that Yitzchak wasn't going to concede. And so I had already sort of focused on that lesson of redigging wells after 9/11, where I spoke about how even after a disaster you have to rebuild. You have to not allow yourself to be knocked down. But was much more powerful to me after October 7th was that the place where all of this took place, Gerar, at least according to many leading archaeologists, and one would say perhaps this is the consensus view, Gerar is right near where the Nova Festival took place. And the people who after the Nova Festival said, we will dance again, they're literally echoing the words of Yitzchak. And so through the year, there were so many instances where the Parsha literally jumped out at me and said, you need to pay attention to this. What happened in the past is actually meant to be a guide for how we live in the present and in the future. And so that was a large process of this book. The second thing, of course, is history. And I will tell you, as the child of Holocaust survivor, the narratives of the Holocaust, which I think loom large for every Jew, loom particularly large for me. And I mentioned earlier my anxieties about whether or not the state of Israel would survive this attack, which were not only mine. I mean, really, a day after, everyone was saying, well, what happens? What happens if Hezbollah goes all in? I mean, Hezbollah had troops. Hezbollah could have invaded. What happens if Iran goes all in? Then don't forget there was Syria that we had to worry about going all in. That there were real worries. And speaking about the Holocaust, I had a friend who lived in Montreal. I see one of my old Montreal friends on screen right now. I had a friend who lived in Montreal who was a Holocaust survivor, who used to say that the state of Israel is an unser nechama. It was our consolation. It was what gave us comfort. And this whole idea of survival shaped my views, but shaped my views in the sense that, obviously the tragedies of the Holocaust are beyond description. Literally, it reminds me of Rav Soloveitchik's famous idea about why Eicha is written in Aleph, in an alphabet format, excepting the final chapter, but it's written literally like in each pasuk is Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daled. And Rav Soloveitchik says that the reason why Yirmiyahu did that was to show that even after he'd gone through every letter in the language, there still were not enough words to describe the destruction. And that, of course, is 100-fold true of the Holocaust, which, as terrible as the Churban Bayit Rishon was, the Holocaust, as the Eish Kodesh says, was even worse. Of course, the horror is indescribable. But what I wanted to get at is that the experience of survival is all the more remarkable. The idea of the ud mutzal me'esh, this brand that's plucked from the fire, the idea that after this enormous destruction, the atzamot yiveshot, the dry bones, come back to life, and God truly takes us out of our graves and brings us to the land of Israel. And so the idea of overcoming became a very, very important theme. And so if you want to talk about the second theme, if the first is heritage, meaning going to the Gemara, going to the Tanakh, the second is our history and thinking back to times in history. So starting with the Holocaust as a template. So one of my first, actually, I think the first article in the book was about the Blushva Rebbe saying a Shehachiyanu on Hanukkah in Bergen-Belsen. And this is a story that was taken from Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust by Yafa Eliach, who interviewed the Blushva Rebbe. And they managed to somehow smuggle a little bit of butter and a button and a thread and a match to allow them to light a menorah. And the Blushva Rebbe was the one honored to light the menorah that night in the barracks. And it's the first night of Hanukkah. He says the first bracha of Lahadlik Ner Shel Hanukkah, second bracha of She'as HaNisim, and he comes to the third bracha and he hesitates. And then he says She'achiyanu. And one of the free thinkers, one of the socialists who had grown up religiously, goes to him afterwards and says, how can you say She'achiyanu in a concentration camp? How can you say She'achiyanu in the middle of hell? And the Blushva Rebbe said, I said She'achiyanu because I realized that all of these Jews here, with their determination to hear this mitzvah, even though the times are horrible, our spirits are strong. And for that, there's reason enough to say She'achiyanu. And so I use that story at the beginning chapter because right after the war started, there's actually a picture of a soldier who was called up from Miluim, whose son had a bris, and he had to literally zoom in to the bris because he's about to go in to Gaza. And you see that they're waiting for him. And it's Sephardic, so Sephardim make a She'achiyanu at the bris. And he says his bracha of She'achiyanu at the end of the bris. And I saw a video of this and I was so taken. Again, because here you see the power of Jewish history. You see the power of the Jewish character, that no matter what happens, we're able to overcome it. Now, there are other points where I used the idea of Jewish history. I wrote actually an article for Chaf Sivan, the 20th of Sivan. The 20th of Sivan was initially, although many people know it as a fast day to commemorate the Chmielnicki massacres in 1648 and 1649. Actually, Chaf Sivan was originally created by Rabbeinu, or ordained. This fast day was ordained by Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's grandson, and it was at the end of his life. And Rabbeinu Tam had survived the Second Crusades at a young age, and in 1170 there was, for the first time, an actual massacre of Jews due to a blood libel allegation. It's the first time that a blood libel actually led to a massacre of Jews. The blood libel had only been invented some 26 years earlier in England. And in a town of Blois, France, they alleged that the Jews had killed a Jew for his blood, killed a baby, a Gentile baby for his blood. And there was no baby, actually. But Rabbeinu Tam understood that there was something incredibly horrible about this blood libel. And he instituted a fast day because of it. And this, I said, is Rabbeinu Tam's powerful insight, because Rabbeinu Tam had seen massacres before, but he knew that if they're going to kill the Jews, not because they're not Christians or not because they just want to kill, but because they claim the Jews are killing them, he knew that the libel is the thing that's most dangerous. And I, of course, reflected on how all of the language of what occurred to the Jews during the Holocaust had now been inverted. They call this now Holocaust inversion, that the language of the Jews are committing a genocide. The Jews are like being like the Nazis. I mean, every single word in in the language that describe every single historical term used to describe what the Nazis did to the Jews are now being used to describe the Israelis. And this is, of course, a contemporary blood libel. And what Rabbeinu Tam understood is that it's one thing to hate Jews and to murder Jews, but when you actually turn them into villains and into demons, then that hatred has no bounds, right? Because normal hatred, at some point, you perhaps feel a sense of guilt because you don't feel so justified doing what you're doing. But if you demonize and turn the Jews into something horrible, then you've flipped everything upside down. So this is a couple of examples of history, right? And then let's talk about heroes. Uh, there are so many remarkable stories, and I've shared a few and spoken about different people. I mean, like Sarit Zussman giving a eulogy for her son Ben, and telling people to remain strong, to push hard. Talking about kids in America, there's a whole group of students at Columbia University that wrote this powerful, powerful public letter, which hundreds signed on to, or actually I think it was in the end thousands, called In Our Name, responding to the handful of Jews who talk about the state of Israel and say, not in our name, or about Rachel Goldberg and the way that she comported herself, uh, trying to bring home her son Hirsch. And when Hirsch passed away, the way she spoke at that funeral. And these are heroes. And the thing with Rachel Goldberg, and that's actually the last essay in the book, uh, is she, I think, taught all of us the power of love. She taught us about how you will, nothing matters, as it says in Shirashim. You'll go from one end of the earth to the other. And she did that. She did that to bring her son home. And unfortunately, she wasn't successful. And the point I wanted to make in that article is you might look at love and say, well, if it's not successful, then maybe love isn't that important. Because, Machiavelli famously said, it's good to be loved and feared, but it's better to be feared than loved. And obviously, raw power seemingly is stronger than something like love. Love is something very gentle, it's something very soft. It doesn't seem to have the capability to control our destiny or our future. But actually, the thing I wanted to point out there is that love has such an incredible long-term impact. The reason why Jews are still here now is because of love, because we've loved each other, because we've loved the Torah, because we've loved God. There's no reason why the Jews should still exist. And so even if Machiavelli might be correct in the short term, I think the Torah is correct in the long term. So this is just a little bit of what this book was about. It's really sort of my Divrei Torah turning out to be fully focused on what has been happening, what happened and has been happening since October 7th. And again, it's three things. It's heritage, history, and heroes that I found sustained me over the last 19 months. So I think we're probably ready for some questions, Shalamis, and I'll leave it to you to ask those questions.
Yes, anybody who has questions, please enter them in the chat so we can address them that way. Any questions?
Okay.
Oh, wait, I think we have a question. Um, Do you foresee a big movement toward orthodoxy?
I, the answer is that there definitely has been a movement um, uh, towards some sort of well, there's been a general movement towards Judaism, but we have I have a couple in the shul. They were an intermarried couple. Uh, they had a child. They have another child now, and they came uh, to they started coming to synagogue. He's now in the process of converting, and this is the sort of thing I think that and they October 7th was part of the inspiration. I know that in many synagogues, people are saying that there are Jews that they've never seen before. This is more common, actually, I think, in conservative and reform synagogues than Orthodox ones. In Orthodox synagogues, people are already, I would say, pretty well affiliated. It was the people who were on sort of on the fence, or people who had kind of taken their religious identity lightly, who then woke up and said, no, either you're one thing or the other, right? It's one of those aware, you have that awareness. If I'm going to have, if I'm willing to hold on to this identity and suffer for it, which is anyone who's saying I'm on the side of Israel is going to be doing. If I'm willing to hold on to this identity and suffer for it, I might as well actually make it part of my life, right? It's ridiculous not to. And so we've had, I would say, a lot of people. I mean, look, I remember one, just to give you a sense of what happened to a lot of Jews who are sort of in that in between area of they're Jewish, but they're they don't think about it that much. So to give you an example, I remember speaking to one of the college students, or actually a graduate student who was in our synagogue, who's in Columbia. I think it's in the graduate school of midwifery, which is a a very, very progressive type of space. And she said that one of her friends looked at her and said, I want you to know that I woke up on October 8th and I did not have a friend left. Every single person that young woman, who had been very progressive herself, literally was out of friends, period, all gone. And so people like that, they woke up and they said, well, we have to figure out what we're going to do with our lives. In other words, if Judaism is going to cost us this much, we might as well find out what we're paying for. And a lot of people also, they were moved. I have to tell you, we're hearing people, and it may seem ironic. I see there's a question, where is God? And we'll have to get to that question for a bit. But actually, ironically, I'm hearing people talk about Hashem more frequently than before. It somehow has spurred people to reflect on their faith. I see that Chana Malka is asking a question that already is asked in the Tanakh by Eov, and it is a perennial question. It's a question that should be asked, even if we know it is impossible to answer it. But I think for many people, actually, in times of difficulty, they're drawn in to speak to God and to talk to God. And Rav Soloveitchik has a beautiful essay, which actually becomes the title of a book that was published of his essays, called Out of the Whirlwind, which is about how God reveals himself to Eov, to Job, in a time of enormous distress, and that in enormous distress, even though you may be angry at God, you actually feel like you can connect to God as well. So where can one sign up for Rabbi Steinmetz's weekly Divrei Torah? We don't have a separate list for the Divrei Torah, but if you join the KJ email list, which means you have to get about 4 or 5 other emails a week, you will get my weekly Divrei Torah. Next I see is Phil Chernotsky. How is October 7, and since affected Aliyah from your community in the States in general? My community in particular, I can't speak about. There, I mean, some of the younger people, I think, are more motivated to join the army, to go to Israel and be in the army after they finish high school. I know that there's certainly young couples. I mean, the people who make Aliyah are generally young couples. There are young couples who are planning on moving there. Is there a perceptible jump in Aliyah? I don't think so in my community, but I know that there is a general jump in Aliyah in the United States. No question about that. And it's kind of, I mean, look, I think that's an incredible statement about the Jewish spirit, right? Who goes in that direction? Well, Jews go in that direction. We know where our home is. We know where our faith is. And we know that however difficult things are, we can overcome it. So it is a great question. I can't speak for this shul as having a huge uptick in Aliyah. We have a small amount of Aliyah, 1 or 2 couples maybe a year, or 1 couple a year. But I think in other places there has been a large uptick in Aliyah. Let's take a look. What's your view on civilians of Gaza? How much care should Israel exercise to protect them, especially while risking the lives of our own military personnel to do so? So, David, that's an excellent question. It is one which there is no ready answer. And it is one actually that probably it depends on the level of threat to Israel. And let me put it this way. For someone to say that there are no obligations during war is completely wrong from a Jewish perspective. For someone to say that your moral obligations prevent you from conducting war is also completely untrue from a Jewish perspective. And the problem is that there is no, I mean, it's really not the topic of my book. I always try to avoid these types of issues. First of all, because I don't know if I'm going to enlighten anyone. Second of all, because even if you look at all of the writing that's been done on this, I mean, Shlomo Brody has an excellent book, which happened to have been published after the war started, but he had written before the war started. It is so difficult, it's so murky to come up with clear guidelines, and in large part because the situation is ever changing. In other words, at some point, the war becomes untenable for a country. You can't fight an endless war. And what Israel did during this war is that it used to have one set of rules related to, collateral damage. In other words, you have a set of guidelines, and they have to change those guidelines because otherwise, in other words, you can't fight. If Hamas is going to fight to the last man, and seems very intent on doing that. So all this to say that I'm not going to give you an answer. I'm just going to say that we have to hold on to 2 things. First of all, is that we really need to be absolutely and thoroughly committed to defending ourselves, because that is one moral obligation, and at the same time, not see indiscriminate killing as something that's acceptable. And somewhere in between is the answer to your question. What is the name of Shlomo's Brody's book? That is a good, it's Ethics of Our Soldiers, I believe. It is printed by Maggid. Question is why? We have 4 people whose primary is not to sleep when everybody else says why they failed. I doubt, though, you have an answer. No, I do have an answer. Why did they fail? Because human beings are prone to overconfidence, right? In Mishlei, it says, Ashrei Adam Afachi Tamed. It's good is one who is always worried, but we're not programmed for that, right? Lifnei Shever Gaon, another wonderful quote from the Tanakh. before failure is pride. Pride walks before failure, I think it is in English. We're not capable, or let me put it this way, we're easily seduced by comfort. Comfort gets us to relax, to let go. And when that happens, that's when unfortunately bad things can occur. And, let's put it this way. People like to hear good news, right? And people have an optimism bias. So that's what's going to happen. Even now, it's funny. Yesterday I was in Washington, whatever, a whole other story. And someone from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, the FDD, was giving us a briefing. A brilliant guy, his PhDs, etc. And he said, "Look," he says, "let's look at Lebanon and Syria." He was just talking about the threats to Israel. He says, "Will Lebanon take control? The Lebanese army can take control and get rid of Hezbollah? Maybe, but probably not. Will al-Jumani in Syria be someone that will be good for Israel? Maybe, but probably not." And so but when I read the newspaper, I'm so glad he said this, because when I read the newspaper, I'm always looking for the positive. And that's just human nature. So anyway, why did that happen? It happened. Let's see, any other questions? I don't know, Shalamis, do you have any other questions there?
I don't see any more. But is it okay if people email you after this event with
Absolutely.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. You really gave us a message of hope. Everybody, you must buy this book. It's really excellent.
Anyways, it's right here. I have to thank Ruthie in my office for making the cover. I actually was there 10 days later. That picture is mine, but she, sort of worked on all of it and made it. She added the kalaniot in the front, which is, sort of her way of creating this sort of contrast. But yeah.
What did she add? I didn't hear what you said.
So what happened is that this is a photo that I took. I went to Israel about, this is actually from a different trip. That I went to Israel also about a month after the war started with a group, and we went to Kfar Aza. So this is a picture in Kfar Aza. And then, someone in my office who does graphics added a photo of Kalaniot into the front yard, because that was not there. So you can sort of see Kalaniot here. And I forget what they call them in English, but it's the red flowers, and anemones. Yes. And so she did it, and it was actually very moving to show that the life that was there, so to speak, just the beauty that was there, and now the horror of destruction, to sort of bring that contrast. So anyway, but thank you. And here, one more question from my friend Moshe. So Moshe said that his grandmother, who passed away last month, I did not know that. How old was your grandmother? You'll tell me later. Went to Auschwitz and never spoke of her experiences, leading me to reflect on her silence. How do you balance the healing power of speaking about atrocities with the pull towards silence? And how can our community honor both who speak and those who cannot? She was 100 years old. So Moshe, excellent question. So my mother was a survivor. She spoke very little. My aunt survived with my mother. My two aunts survived with my mother. So my late aunt who lived in New York and in San Diego. So my late aunt went to every conference, spoke, and thankfully for my aunt, we have her testimony to the US, the Spielberg Foundation. So there's a Gemara, I think if I remember correctly, it's in Yuma, or maybe it's in Psach, I can't remember, which goes on the pasuk of Da'ag ebelev ish yasichera. If someone has a worry, a hurt in their heart. Yasichena. Yasichena is with the sin, but you can read it as meaning siach, to speak, or lehasiach, to push out of your mind. And the Gemara actually has an argument. Is it better to forget about things that horrify you, or is it better to talk about them? Now, if you ask contemporary psychologists, they would tell you, talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. And then there are others who will say, maybe not so much, or maybe not now, or maybe not for everyone, right? The normal dogma now is to talk, and that may be true. And I know people who have incurred horrible losses, particularly a couple that lost a son many years ago in a terror attack. And they try to speak about it every chance they have. Actually, speaking about yesterday in Washington, so I heard Yechiel Leiter speak, and he's Israel's new ambassador to the United States. And he was speaking about his son Moshe, who was a remarkable young man. He was a doctor, 39, who died in battle. And he was talking about how he, as a bereaved father, can come to Washington a couple months later. He told us the conversation that he had with Bibi, because Bibi had nominated him to many different posts over the years, and he refused. And Bibi called him and said, would you be the new ambassador to the United States? And so he hesitated on the phone. And then Bibi said, what would your son Moshe tell you to do? And he immediately said, okay, I will go. And the way Yechiel Leiter put it, and he was speaking to us about his son, and you could see this is what he does all the time. He says, I wake up every morning and I put my son Moshe on my shoulders, and I go to work, and I'm doing it for him. So there's different ways. I think the dogma is to speak. It may not be true for everyone. And Moshe wasn't true for your grandmother, it wasn't true for my mother, although my mother told me a couple of stories. And it's just a question of what's the best way to go through things.
Wow. What can I say except Mika Amcha Yisrael?
Yep.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, he's a remarkable man, Yechiel Leiter. So yes.
Thank you so much. This was so inspiring, and it's just a shame that more people, we can have another one, another Jew.
Well, we have this is taped, isn't it? That people
it is taped, yeah. So people will get it, right?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I believe there's another question in the chat. I don't know if we have time for it.
Is there?
Yes.
Oh, Phil, tell us all about the Jewish community. Oh,
yeah, there was a question from Phil right before the
I
question that was answered.
Okay, so tell us about the Jewish community. Okay, fighting against the rise of anti-Semitism. So, so much to say here. So back to my trip to Washington yesterday. So also Richie Torres was one of the people, and I said to Richie, I said, in a sense, you are a non-Jew who experiences anti-Semitism, which is absolutely true. He has become a Jew by proxy, and people hate him. And I spoke to him. I said, like, where do you think this all came from? Like, we had a group and we were conversing with him, and he says this goes back a long time. The explosion of anti-Semitism since October 7th is simply something that was sitting dormant under the ground. It was at least the conditions were always there. There was the sense that Jews are oppressors because they are in the lists, according to intersectionality, on the wrong side, and Palestinians are victims. And if you're a victim, you can never do wrong. And if you're an oppressor, you can never do right. And that's essentially where a lot of this has been coming from. So the anti-Semitism is probably sitting under the ground, although, what happens is that when it explodes, than people who may not be pulled in or pulled in. Again, we were talking to some university students, and one of the university students was saying that, and obviously not that careful about kashrut, that in her dormitory, a young woman who had baked her a cake when she moved in September literally stopped talking to her, wouldn't say a word to her after October 7th. Like a young woman who wanted to bring her in and welcome her and bring her a cake. All of a sudden, October 7th, you're a Jew, you're out. And that's the sort of thing that has happened here. Anti-Semitism is a problem. But as I tell people in my shul, I said, guess what? People experienced anti-Semitism 100 years ago too. My mother, my parents, my grandparents, they lived through anti-Semitism. So we'll live through it also. Anyway, I see I have one more question, which I will do for my friend Shragai HaKohen, who I have not seen in several years. It is great to see him on Zoom. What is the meaning of Netzach Yisrael Lo Yishaker? Assuming we know what exactly that pasuk. We like to quote the pasuk. But the translation we all prefer, these wonderful words of Shmuel Hanavi. The translation we all prefer, Netzach Yisrael Lo Yishaker, is that the destiny of the Jewish people cannot be subverted in any way. It will never prove false. It will always go forward. And that's actually Shragai, that's a great note to end this with. We are all here. We're all testaments to the fact that Netzach Yisrael Lo Yishaker. And thank God Israel has turned the tide at an enormous cost, with enormous pain, but we've turned the tide. And we're an optimistic people. We're people who believe in the future. It's Zechariah that says that we're Asirei Tikva. That's a phrase that Yehuda Halevi takes out of Zechariah. We're prisoners of hope. That's who we are, which is a play on words, because when we were prisoners, we had hope, and when we're not prisoners, we're imprisoned by that hope, and that's who we are. And so, yes, Netzach Yisrael Lo Yishaker. It's really been wonderful spending this time with all of you. And Shulamis, thank you again for putting this together, and thank you to YU for organizing all of this. I'm incredibly grateful.
We're very grateful to you. I also want to give a shout out to Chaya Sarah Cantor, otherwise known as Hallie Cantor, because she did a lot of behind the scenes promotion of this event. Without her, with this wouldn't have taken off. So thank you, Chaya Sarah. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
The recording will be sent out, and remember, buy the book. And to all those in Israel, Lila Tov, and everybody else, have a good day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.